everybody, welcome to today's video. I haven't shared a Plan With Me layout in quite a while, so I thought I'd take the opportunity today to share this with you. This again is part of the Quirky Heart Digest that I've been a part of since May. And the theme for September has been school. So what I'm going to do this week's prompt, or I guess next week's prompt, is to do your favorite subject. For me, my favorite subject, well, one of my favorite subjects was English literature. So this week's layout is going to focus on books. So what I've done is I've already penciled everything in. It's going to be a bit of a Dutch door. It's actually going to be a multi-Dutch door, so I'll show you my idea shortly. These are going to be my daily layouts. As you can see, I have them all over the place. And these are just going to be books that I'm going to color in. So I did my headings over here using just a generic stencil out of one of these kits. And then I'll be going over it in pen. I'll also be going over all of this in pen for you. I've already drafted it, as you can see. The bookshelves, I'll pretty much be coloring all of this in colored pencil. One thing that helps when you are using colored pencil in your planner is to grab a fixative spray so that you don't get transfer from one page to another. As you can see, I've already done the layouts and there's very little transfer from this page onto this page, and that's because I sprayed the fixative. So now what makes this an extra Dutch door is that I have cut out little pieces of paper that I will be sticking over top there, and that will be my day so that it looks like a book. So I'll be using my Tim Holtz Distress Inks to color these guys in. What I've done is I've already masked it. I actually have quite a few sticky notes for masking. I have various different sizes because I was tired of having to fussy cut everything, and like this, for example, is a fussy cut. But I've actually left an example here where I just took one of these. It was a perfect size and I just have to trim it down. And the nice thing about the bullet journal dots is that it's just super easy to line up and just cut the guy off there. And then if you're worried about the sticky note lifting when you're doing your blending with your inks or stamping, what you can do is, this is some artist's tape, or you can just grab generic masking tape, or you can even grab washi tape if you want. And then just, oopsies, double roll it, stick it down there, and stick it down. So that's gonna lift off easily when I'm done so that I don't get color transfer everywhere. Okay, so the color schemes I'll be using, I'll be using a combination of the Hallowed Halls and the Smarty Pants. I just found this to be very limiting and this to be very limiting, so I kind of wanted to do a combination of both. So I have my distress inks all set up and ready to go. So I'm going to actually start with decorating the distress inks, or the books, for you guys, and that way I can get the masking tape off. You never really want the masking tape to be sitting on there for too long, because that's when you're going to run into problems. So, or it might get too sticky and not be as nice when you lift it. So thank you for watching. So I pre-arranged the colors I was going to use for my distress inks using the chart I'd created. I just downloaded off of the Ranger website, and I wanted to make sure that I was using the lighter of the two colors first. So every book was decorated with two colors, a lighter color and then a darker version of it. I started off with the lighter color went in with the darker color and then went back in with the lighter color just to smooth out the blend a little bit more. The reason why I use Distress inks on the books is so that I could write the authors on them. The issue with pencils, they create a waxy layer that's really hard to write on. When I did the when I did the lines to decorate the books in the bookshelf, I had to use gel ink pens, which had a bit of a sheen to it, or ballpoint pens, which had a bit of a sheen to it, and I wanted to avoid doing that on the actual books themselves. I had pre-decided what colors I wanted to use using the swatches that I had shown you earlier. And this was just me going in and decorating them. I wanted to keep the days and the titles in the white block, just to make it clear that that was the day I was working on. My brain hasn't been the best lately, so figure might as well make it obvious for me. So I would open it up like this because the back didn't matter. I could get as much ink as I wanted on the back because that's the part that's going to be glued down. I mentioned somewhere along the lines, I think, that I ended up cutting these pieces out of the back of my journal. I just took the pages out, measured what I wanted, and then cut them out. It's just a journal after all. So they weren't cut into the spread, they were added to it. I believe that's a question somebody had, so just very simple concept. I glued it down using double-sided tape. I don't show the gluing down in the video, but just for reference, I used double-sided tape to stick them down. I also mentioned about the artist tape. If you do leave it on for too long, you are going to rip up some of the page underneath the sticky notes, so that's why I just wanted to finish this off as quickly as possible so that I could get that tape off of my work. So I used quite a few different colors. The colors are listed up on my blog that you can see which ones I used specifically to create this layout. I also wanted the colors to be a bit softer than the other books in the bookshelf. Like I said, I knew I was going to write on them, or at least give me the option to write on them. So, and you want to be careful. So you see me flipping the page over and over depending on what color I'm working on. You don't want to transfer any of the ink from the scrap page onto your actual page. The scrap page I was using is just a piece of generic printer paper, so it does tend to absorb quickly, which isn't too bad. But you still want to avoid any unnecessary transfer. I do tap the sponge before I put it on my work. Part of the reason being it's just for a better blend overall. Especially with the darker colors, I didn't want them to necessarily overpower the lighter ones. And once you already have the lighter ink on there, it's almost like the darker ink runs onto the page. I don't know how to describe it. It's easier to blend the darker once you have a layer of ink on. So yeah, and then when it's time, just carefully remove it. Also, you are going to get transfer of ink on your hands, so you want to be very careful where you're touching your work. Again, you don't want to get any colors on there that you weren't planning on. So here I'm just outlining the boxes, the white boxes. Just interesting fact, actually, I find my Crayola pencils blend better with the Distress inks, or the colors match better. So sometimes the sticky note will be just a bit off and I have a little bit of white space. I just go in with the Crayola pen and just fill it in a bit. They match better. For the rest of the layout, I used my Prismacolors, but for filling in the spots after using Distress ink, I tend to use Crayola. To do my lines, I'm just using my Tombow Mono drawing pens. I used about 3 or 4 different pens in this layout. Reason being how each of the different inks plays on the medium, so the pencil and the ink and stuff. So the Distress inks, the mono drawing pen on the Distress inks is perfect. When I did the outline for my books, you're about to see me do the outline, I used my mono drawing pen as well. When I filled out the words for the date and the English literature, I used a Papermate Flair. Reason for that, if you go over a Papermate Flair with a blender pencil, it doesn't smudge quite as much as the mono drawing pens do. So here I'm just using my Tombow mono drawing pens in the 05 size. I go through these Tombow drawing pens like no man's business. I use them so much. And like I mentioned, I already penciled it in to begin with. Things I took into consideration when I was doing the penciling in was the different heights. Did they look appealing? Was there enough variation? Just little things like that. I did put a sheet of paper underneath the flap portion of the layout. Reason being, I didn't want the pencil to transfer all over the pages and make it difficult to draw lines. I had a hair on the tip of my mono drawing pen, which is why I'm fiddling with it so much. So I made this video in pieces because a lot of it is duplication, since I had 2 pages that were essentially the same. I didn't want to bore anybody, so whatever I did on the first page, I just did the same thing on the second page. The other trick I did was once this page was completed, I did spray it down with fixative so that I wouldn't get the transfer when I worked on the page behind it. And that was a big difference too. In order to get the lines from my plates so close together, I actually used a grid ruler. I have an example of it on my blog, which I got from Blick Stationery, or Blick Art Supplies. And as mentioned in the earlier video, the lettering stencil I used was just a generic stencil from a high school math protractor kit. So nothing fancy, nothing special. And as you can see, I am using my Papermate Flair. And also, it took me a day to realize that there is no September 31st. So, just proof that not all layouts are perfect. And yes, I finished everything, posted it on social media, and only then did I realize my mistake. But I wasn't going to redo it. This layout took quite a bit to do, just in terms of adding color, adding the effects to the books. It was fun, I enjoyed it, but yes, it did turn out to be a lot of work. So, when working on the flap, you definitely want to make sure you have a piece of paper underneath it. Since those lines could potentially transfer onto the next page, it would be really frustrating to have those lines show up, so just worked with a sheet of paper underneath it. The other trick, I waited till I was finished coloring in and drawing the lines and decorating before I glued the books down, the dailies down. Reason being, I didn't want to accidentally bend the page with my hand as I was going back and forth coloring in. I am notorious for that, so I just wanted to make sure they were going to stay intact and I wasn't going to damage them. I am now going in and adding pen like I did to the September and the dates. I really wish I had gone back in with the stencil. Reason being, I was having issues balancing the weight of the letters, so it ended up looking a bit splotchy every here and there. So you can actually see me go back and forth trying to balance it out better. I also ran into issues at the end of the page where my hand kept falling off and it kept causing issues. So I just grabbed another journal that was the same height, and that helped keep my hand steady. But if I were to do this part again, I would definitely go back in with the same stencil and add weight that way. Once that was all penned in, I went in with the eraser just to get rid of some of those lines. Reason being, if you're going over with a blender pencil and you smudge a little bit of that pencil, it's going to make a smear, especially when you're using lighter colors like yellows and pinks and purples. I've definitely done that too many times. So, yeah, I always make sure that I can get those pencil lines gone. My next step was to start swatching my colors. I wanted to make sure that the pencil crayons I was going to use for the books in the bookshelf, matched my dailies and kind of matched more or less the color swatches on the sheet that we were given to work with. So when I'm reaching over, I'm reaching into my Prisma colored pencil tin, and I just keep picking up colors to see which ones would work best. And I also wanted to make sure that it was still balanced as well. And you'll see when I start coloring in, you'll see me go in and you'll see how I work on the balance. But basically, I use sticky notes for everything, color swatching, quick note taking, all this, that, and the other. So since the dailies were the biggest part of my layout, I went in and I placed them where I wanted them, and then I would color in the books accordingly. It's tough because you want the colors to balance out and match each other well and all that. So that comes with practice, just like everything else. Everything is just practice, practice, practice. And also what's appealing to the eye. And you're not going to appeal to every eye. So worst case scenario, appeal to your own eye and you'll find somebody who agrees with you. So now I'm just going in and I'm coloring in the bookshelf. I wasn't too concerned with how I was coloring it in, mostly because I knew just going up and down was going to create a grainy effect of wood on a bookshelf. So I wasn't too fussed. I'm still learning the art of coloring in myself. So I just wanted to create some shadows, some lines, just something to add a bit of dimension to the bookshelf. And then, as you can see where I lifted my pencil up in the different sections, I didn't want to bore you with the full video, so I just kind of cut it off there. But basically, it was just generic coloring in back and forth, adding some shadows here and there. And at the end of it, I went over it with my blender pencil, which is why you can't see the lines. Like you'll see when I color in the books, how it kind of looks rough, versus once you go over with the blender pencil, you're going to get that smooth finished effect. So I placed my daily pages on the page as best I could, just to try get an idea, like I said, for color balance, for what was most appealing to the eye, for what made the most sense to the eye. And that's how I picked what color the next book was going to be. So I also wanted to add dimension, like books being pushed forward, books being pushed back. So I try to do that with shadows. Like I said, I'm still learning because I'm going to call it the raw pencil. When you color in with the raw pencil, it's definitely a lot darker than when you go in with the blender and you blend it all out. When you blend it all out, everything just softens. So I'm still trying to figure out the balance between keeping the shadows that I want and not feeling like I'm going overboard. So it's all just a learning curve. And here where you can see, I wanted to show that the spine had some weathering to it because it is one of the larger books. And so that was the nice thing about playing with shadowing and effects with the bookshelf, is the fact that it can be very forgiving because it just looks like the book's been read a number of times. So I only decorated this page, only video recorded this one page because, like I said, it gets a bit tedious after a while because it's the same thing over and over again. Here what I did was I didn't want to transfer onto the next page, so I just stuck a sticky note down to try and capture some of that color so that it didn't blend into the page beside it. As you can see, I'm going up and down, but I'm also starting to go in different directions. Reason being, it's not like the bookshelf where it's like a wooden texture, so it's okay to have the lines showing back and forth up and down. I wanted this to be softer. I didn't want the lines to be as obvious. So once I had the shadowing I wanted, I just went in and kind of tried to soften the lines out a little bit by going in a different direction. So here's me and my blender pencil. As you can see, it's very short. I do have a pencil extender that I got as part of a Prismacolor set, which has been amazing, by the way. I strongly recommend it if you're going to use blender pencils a lot. I actually go through blender pencils like crazy just because I use them so much and I'm so hard on them. I push hard, I'm constantly sharpening them. And so the reason for constantly sharpening them, you want to be careful because if you have color on that tip, it will transfer over into the next item that you blend. So that's why I always go back in and sharpen it and get that point where I can blend into the corners, but then also, as you can see, I'm drawing on the white sheet of paper just to get rid of that extra color on the tip that gets left over from sharpening. I really love the effect of blending and how it smooths out. So it's harder to see on the green, but if you look back at the red, the color I had was a lot more saturated. And once I went in with the blender pencil, it kind of smoothed it out a bit and took away from the sharpness of the original color, the raw pencil, if you will. And you'll see it too when I do the background of the books as well, the background of the bookshelf. I went to town just putting color down and it still lifted once I'd started doing the blending. I guess the dark green, you can get an idea for how much it softens up the color. But overall, I'm really enjoying learning how to color and playing with colors. So as I mentioned before, I didn't include how I decorated the back of the books. What I did was I basically took a ruler. I could still see some of the dot grids behind it and just started drawing in how I remembered or how I see books looking, whether it's Barnes & Noble or the library. You can Google image a bookshelf and get ideas from there. When I used circles, I actually bought a really amazing circle stencil from Blick Art Supplies, the Picket Circle Master inking template. It's a few different size circles on one template. I will have a picture of it on my blog. It's become one of my go-tos. I've been using circles a lot in my layouts, and 90% of the time I'm freehanding them. So I wanted to find something that I didn't have to freehand all the time. So I finally found this stencil. So, and like I said, I'll share it with you on my blog. So, as you can see here, my next step is to go in with the dark brown pencil, where I'm adding all my shading. I added my shading first, and for the shading, it was pretty straightforward. It's at the very back of the books, so it wasn't, I just made it dark pretty much, most of it dark pretty much. So, and the other thing I liked about this layout was that everything was little to color in. I don't like it when you have these big pieces of just white space to color in. That's where my poor color technique and lack of color technique really shows. So at least here, you know, you have your little rectangles and then you have all the space in the back to fill out. So very forgiving from a coloring in standpoint. So, and again, as you can see, I have the paper in the background, catching any of the color that's bleeding over onto the layout behind it. And just to emphasize, once I finished coloring this piece in and blending it, I did go in with a fixative spray and sprayed it before I started working on the back. Because if I had color transfer, I would have cried. It took a lot of effort, a lot of work, so I definitely would have cried. So that's what everything looks like blended. I'm now coloring in the plate silver. So as I mentioned, it was fantastic with the Papermate pen because I was able just to coloring over top of the Papermate pen. I was also able to go in and blend over top of it without too much of a hassle, which was great. And then instead of smudging, the black ink dulled a little bit, but it didn't smudge. So, and I don't mind dulling. You can always go in and add more, but when it smudges is when I get upset. So, well, I hope you liked watching this. Like I said, it was just the generic portion. If you want more information, please hop on over to my blog and I'll include a list of the supplies I used. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, on my blog, YouTube. I am very accessible from that standpoint, and I'd love to answer any questions, and I'd love to help you express your creativeness. Thank you very much for watching today.